Hela, welcome. Now in this video I'm going to be doing something rather different to what I normally do. Now you may have noticed that in my most recent videos about the Anglo-Saxon runes that I've been dressed in authentic Anglo-Saxon outfits. Now I've always endeavoured to make these as authentic as possible, so I've decided to try and take that process to the next level by dyeing my cloth using authentic plant dyes. So in the course of this video I'm going to take you through the process of dyeing this plain unbleached undyed linen with madder. Now madder is one of the plants which has been used for around 5,000 years to dye cloth. It was definitely used by the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings, and it grows readily in the UK. So as I said, I'm going to take you through the entire process. So the first stage that we're going to go through is scouring. Now scouring is basically giving the fabric a really deep cleanse in order to remove any dirt and grease that would inhibit the dye from taking to the cloth. Once that stage is done, we're going to mordant the fabric, and that's a vital process to ensure that the dye actually sticks to the fabric and stays fast. And then once we've been through those two preparation stages, we're going to actually dye the cloth using madder root. Now once I've dyed this cloth, I'll be making it into an Anglo-Saxon warrior tunic. It could also be for a Viking because they're basically the same design. So although I've got some rather nice ladies outfits, I figured that as Anglo-Saxon men seem to have all the fun, I would make myself an Anglo-Saxon warrior's outfit. So in another video I will also take you through that process and show you how that is done. So for now we're going to be dyeing this cloth with madder root, and as I said, the first stage is the scouring, so let's get started with that. Okay, so before we get started, let's look at what equipment you're going to need, and we'll start with the scouring equipment. So of course we're going to need fabric to dye, so I'm using linen, and this process is for plant-based fibres only. Scales, you're going to need scales to weigh your fabric, and some kind of container for mixing up the scouring solution, which is soda ash, as you can see. Now you can buy this really easily on the internet, and a spoon for spooning the soda ash. So we also need a bucket, a good practical bucket, and the saucepan. Now I just want to say this is stainless steel, a nice big saucepan. As you can see, it got the label on it, came from a charity shop. Do not use this for cooking your soup or anything to do with food. It has to be a dedicated saucepan for dyeing, and a wooden spoon. Again, all of this equipment, the tongs, you shouldn't use them for cooking food, and a food thermometer, which is vital for this process. So yeah, definitely don't mix this equipment with making food. So let's look at mordanting. Okay, so we're going to be using aluminium acetate, which is a great all-round mordant for plant-based fibres. Some kind of vessel for mixing it up in, and a whisk is really handy. Again, I can't impress upon you that you mustn't use this for food. And there's that spoon again. And oh, the scales. Yeah, you can use a spoon or you can weigh it out. It doesn't matter which. Okay, so a mask. Chances are, with what's going on in the world, you've probably got one of those kicking around that you can use. Oh, it's those tongs again. And the wooden spoon again. And oh look, it's a thermometer again. You're definitely going to need that. And then what we go, oh, what's coming here? Oh, it's the wheat bran. Now I probably bought a much bigger bag than I needed. That will probably last me for years. And some little muslin bags, they're really handy. Could do with a few of those if you are going to be plant dyeing. And this lovely big plastic tub, which will be perfect for the mordanting. Now let's look at the equipment we need for dyeing. So you can see what I've got here is bags and bags of madder root, chopped up, Rubia tinctorum. Now this stuff is quite expensive, and I've ended up having to buy quite a lot for this project because I've got quite a heavy piece of fabric. But we'll see how that goes shortly. Okay, so let's start with stage 1, which is the scouring. So the very first thing we need to do is weigh the fabric. You must know how much fabric you've got to work out all the quantities for this process. So stick it on the scales, weigh it, and write it down. Write it down and do not lose it, okay? You're going to need that. Now let's weigh out the soda ash, which is what we're going to be using for the scouring process. So weigh it out. Now what you need is, for every 100 grams of dry fabric, you need 2 grams of the soda ash. Mix it up with some cold water, and then once you've got it into kind of a nice paste, then add some boiling water to the soda ash and get it really nicely blended. Now if you don't have scales, you can also use a teaspoon to measure out your soda ash. It can be done either way. Now we need to make sure that our fibre is wet. So put it in a bucket and make sure it's really well saturated with water. The fabric needs to be wet before you start the scouring process. Okay, so now we're over on the hob, and I've filled up the stainless steel saucepan with cold water, and I'm adding the soda ash solution and give it a stir. So now we're going to add our wet linen, wring it out as best you can, and then into the saucepan. Now it would appear that somebody, me, forgot about displacement, so I'm just going to speed through this bit that I messed up because that was going to go all over the hob. Okay, so the fabric needs to ideally be able to move around freely. Now I have kind of taken on a bit of a project here. We're trying to dye quite a large amount of fabric, nearly 700 grams of linen there, and it did make it rather difficult to kind of move this around freely. So what we need to do now is we need to gradually bring this temperature up to 180 degrees Fahrenheit, and for those of you that are using centigrade, as indeed I am, that's around 82 degrees centigrade. Now try to rotate the fibres gently as you go, as you're increasing the temperature of the water. And once you've got it up to that heat, you need to hold it at that temperature at 180 degrees Fahrenheit or 82 degrees centigrade. You need to hold it at that temperature for 30 minutes. Now I found the best way to do this was to turn my heat down to its absolutely lowest setting and rest the lid on the saucepan. Keep an eye on it, but it does, if you're careful, then it will stay at that temperature. And as I said, you need to hold it there for 30 minutes. Now you can see as the temperature is increasing, the water is going quite a murky colour. Now this is brand new linen, so you can see that even in fabric that appears to be clean, it actually isn't. And the point of this scouring process is to basically remove any dirt and grease that would inhibit the dye from taking to the fabric. Okay, so once it's up to temperature, set your timer for 30 minutes, leave that lid on and just keep an eye on it, but on a really low heat. It should stay at the correct temperature. And just look at how it's looking towards the end of the process. It really does look like something Grendel's done, doesn't it? Hard to believe that that was brand new linen. Okay, so that's the scouring stage done now, and now we're going to move on to the mordanting, which is the process that ensures that the dye actually sticks to the fabric. Okay, so we're going to be using aluminium acetate for the mordanting, which is a good all-round mordant for plant-based fibres. Oh, hang on, what's that doing there? Just move that. And we need to measure out the aluminium acetate to between 5 and 10% WOF, or weight of fibre, which is 2 to 4 rounded teaspoons per 100 grams of dry fibre if you're using a spoon. Now, to begin with, we're going to blend it with cold water. Now this takes quite a lot of blending. It can be quite lumpy and sticky, and actually takes quite a long time to blend with water and get rid of all those lumps. So just gradually add the water and keep mixing. And you should be wearing a mask. There's my mask for this, because it can give off some dust, which isn't great for your lungs. Now of course I've sped this up, there's no way I can mix that fast, but it does just take so long to get rid of all those lumps. Now once I've got it smooth, I'm adding some boiling water and then going to continue to mix that, trying to get rid of all those lumps. And at this stage it's good to use a whisk just to really get it nice and smooth, get rid of all those lumps there. That's great. Now I've been a little bit naughty because really I should have been wearing gloves, so yes, do wear gloves. Do as I say, not as I do. I'm a bit of a stupid risk taker at times. There's the gloves that I should have been wearing. Okay, so I'm actually going to use the plastic tub for this process because you don't need the water that hot. So really hot tap water, fill it up with that and add the aluminium acetate that we've already prepared. That's right, get it all in there. Give it a stir. And now we can start to add the wet fibres that have already been scoured. So let's get them in there. And give it a bit of a mix around, get those fibres moving around the bath. You can see I've got a little bit of help there from a young helper. Now, the temperature that this needs to be, it doesn't need to be that hot, it needs to be between 110 and 120 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're using centigrade, that's between 43 and 49 degrees centigrade. So if the water from the tap isn't quite hot enough, then fill up the kettle and add a bit of boiling water to it. But that's the kind of temperature you want it to be. So after we've moved the fabric around, put the lid on and keep it like that for 45 minutes, or you can leave it overnight. Now, the next stage is to prepare the wheat bran bath. So that's the next stage, and we need 5 grams or 4 teaspoons per 100 grams of fibre. So I've got a lot of fibre here, so I'm having to weigh out a lot of wheat bran. So what I've done, I've put it in a muslin bag because I don't want my fibre all covered in bits of wheat bran. So put it in a muslin bag and then get some water that's just gone over the boil and cover the wheat bran bag with the hot water. Now you then need to leave that for around 30 minutes, and after 30 minutes we're ready to make the wheat bran bath. So the fibres have been drained after being in the aluminium acetate bag. So again, hot water around the same temperature as we had it before, and we're adding the wheat bran water that the bag soaked in and yet more hot water from the tap so that the fabric can move around freely. And just now adding the linen to the wheat bran bath. Move it all around. Should probably have those gloves on again, but I haven't. Get the fibres moving around. And again, check the temperature. Again, you want it to be between 110 and 120 degrees Fahrenheit, 43 to 49 degrees centigrade. If your tap water's not hot enough, add a bit of boiling water just to get that temperature to where you need it to be. And hold it there for about 30 minutes. Make sure you agitate it and move it around during that process. Okay, so at the end of the 30 minutes we can drain those fibres, and I forgot to mention in my equipment that it's really handy to have a strainer like this. That was another charity shop find. So just wring out the linen and stick it in a drainer. Now if you are then going to go straight on to the dyeing, then you don't need to do anything else. But I actually wasn't ready to go straight into the dyeing, so I just spun my fibre and dried it. Okay, so all the preparation work is done now, all the hard work is done, the cloth has been scoured, the cloth has been mordanted, and now it's time to get to the really fun stage of actually dyeing the cloth with the madder root. So let's get cracking. Okay, so with the madder root, if you want really intense colour, you should go for 100% weight of fibre. Now I had nearly 700 grams and I couldn't afford to buy 700 grams of madder, so I went for 500 grams. And what I'm doing, I'm putting it all in a muslin bag to keep it all together. Now in hindsight, what I should have done was put it into 2 bags, because it really does swell up when you soak it. So a bucket of cold water, put your bag of madder roots into there and soak it overnight. Now I did have to top this up a few times, and as I said, it really does swell up, so in hindsight I should have used 2 bags. I just had no idea how much it would swell up. So that's going to soak overnight. You can already see the colours coming out. It looks lovely, doesn't it? Or a bit gruesome, I'm not sure which. Okay, so it's now soaked overnight, now looking even more gruesome. So what I'm doing, I'm pouring all the soaking liquid into my large stainless steel saucepan, and then I am putting the brick, as it's now become, a big solid brick of madder root. As I said, I should have used 2, into the saucepan and topping it up with cold water. Now I'm going to try and add my fibre, but this is where I realised the problem, and I'll talk more about this later. But as you can see, there's not a lot of room, because the big brick of madder root, well, it's just taking up too much space in the saucepan. So this is the point where I realised that things had gone a little bit wrong. And I had to abort my mission of trying to keep all the madder root nicely contained within the bag so it wouldn't go all over the fibre, and I had to release it from its bag there and tip it in, because there was just no way I could move the fibre around. And this is when it gets really, really messy. And look, I've got my hands in there again with no gloves. I really should have put the gloves on here. I'll talk more about that later, but and this is where I realised though that although my saucepan was really quite big old stock pot, I could have done with a saucepan twice the size. Look, I've still got more madder root to add. There is loads of it, and there really isn't much room in the saucepan. I'd have been much better if I was only dyeing about half that amount of linen, but I needed enough linen to make my warrior tunic. So I couldn't really have got away with any less, but I do have a few ideas on that I'll talk about at the end of this video. But try to move it around. Hopefully you'll either have a much bigger saucepan or you're going to be dyeing a smaller amount. But it did get quite messy and quite difficult here, and it wasn't that easy to move the fibre around. Now gradually bring the temperature up to around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 33 degrees centigrade. Keep rotating the fabric if you can. It was definitely easier said than done in this circumstance. But once you get it to that temperature, hold it there for 30 minutes. Now it is quite a low temperature, so I found the best way was just to put it on really the lowest setting possible on my hob. Every now and again I may have to, I did find that I had to turn in the actual hob off for the temperature to stay low enough, but you need to try and hold it at that temperature for 30 minutes. And yes, once again, I should have been wearing the gloves, but I didn't, and I did end up with red hands. So if you want to be sensible, then you should probably wear gloves if you're going to go rooting around in your dye pot. I probably panicked a little bit as I ended up with too much in the pot, and I was a little bit unsure of how to move the fabric around other than sticking my hands in there, which I did. So yeah, probably wear the gloves. Okay, so after you've held the temperature at 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 33 degrees centigrade, for around 30 minutes, then what you need to do is to begin to gradually increase the temperature up to 180 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 80 degrees centigrade. Now as you do that, you need to rotate the fabric gently. Obviously that's a lot easier if you haven't got as much fabric in your pot as I have, otherwise it becomes a bit of a tricky mess. But yes, keep rotating the fabrics as much as you can and gradually increasing that temperature. Now when you get it to 180 degrees Fahrenheit or 80 degrees centigrade, what you need to do is to hold it at that temperature for 30 to 45 minutes. Now don't let it boil. If you let it boil, then the colour can become kind of dull and brown and muddy, and we don't want that, we want red. So yeah, just try and hold it at that temperature. Again, I found the best way to do that is to put the lid on
turn the heat right down and just keep an eye on it, and during that process keep rotating the fibres as much as you can. As you can see, it wasn't that easy for me, and this was a bit of a problem with the whole process. Okay, so having held the dye bath at that temperature for 45 minutes, it's time to rinse the cloth now and see what results we've got. So because of the fact that the madder root is loose and not contained in its bag, this is actually quite a messy stage, as you can see, with dye and madder root going everywhere. So definitely don't do this on your best tablecloth. Yes, it's madder does dye things that you don't want it to, so do be careful when you're doing this. And I'm putting it into the plastic tub, and I've filled this up with nice hot water, and I've tried to get it about the same temperature as the temperature of the cloth, and moving it all around to give it a good rinse. And as you can see, trying to have a look to see how it's come out. I mean, it does look lovely in red. Managed to not let it boil, which does muddy the colour. So far it's looking not too bad. Now, after giving it its first rinse, I'm going to put it into the bucket so that I can then tip away that water and fill it up again and do the second rinse. Okay, so this is the second rinse. I'm trying to get rid of as many bits of madder root as I can before I put it in the washing machine. So once you've rinsed your fabric twice, place it into your washing machine and wash it on a gentle cycle, about 30 degrees, using either a neutral washing liquid, or I actually use my Eco Laundry egg that I use for most of my washing actually. Once you've done that, hang up your fabric, but don't hang it up in direct sunlight. I actually hung mine inside on a clothes horse, and that worked perfectly well. Now you can reuse your dye bath again. I actually did a second batch of linen that I'm going to use to make a patchwork fairy tale dress, and I'll show you the results that I got at the end of the video. The colours weren't as intense as the first dye bath, but they were still pretty good, so you can definitely reuse your dye bath before getting rid of the madder root. Okay, so let's have a look at the results and let's hear some of my thoughts on the process. Right, so we're going to have a look at the results of the dyeing now. So this is the main piece of cloth. Now overall, I'm reasonably pleased, but there are a few problems. Namely, it's a little bit patchy and a little bit speckled, as you can see. Now, when I was doing this dyeing, I came to a few conclusions. Namely, the saucepan that I was using was just far too small. Although it was a big saucepan, it was far too small for this amount of cloth. So I think if I was doing it again, which I'm sure I will be, what I would do I would actually cut the pieces of the tunic, leaving about an extra inch all the way round for fraying, because linen does fray quite a lot, and then I would just dye those pieces. But it has made me think, I'm pretty sure our ancestors, our Viking and Anglo-Saxon ancestors, the poor people probably wouldn't have dyed their clothes much. I think colour would probably have been a luxury. Also, when I used to do reenactment many years ago, and I think this is still the case now, they always say don't have different coloured sleeves to the body. But I actually think that maybe that isn't the case at all, because I can quite imagine that the body might have gone in the first dye pot, and then the arms or other parts of the tunic might have gone into the second dye pot. So I think it's quite probable that our ancestors would have been a bit more patchworky. Also, I think you would have had such a massive cauldron to do this, which would have been expensive, that perhaps this was a specialist trade rather than being a everyday household activity. It's difficult to know, but these are just some of the thoughts that I had while I was doing this. So this is the main piece of cloth for the tunic from the first dye pot. I also put some extra bits of linen in to the exhaust dye bath to use it again. This is the same colour. This was a plain unbleached, the same as the linen used for the main tunic. You can see it's come out a really nice pinky colour, but it's much paler. I also dyed some different coloured cloths. So this one was originally like a pale bluey green, as was this one. And this piece of cloth here was what I'd used for my cloak. That was sort of a pale beigey brown before I dyed it. So you can have some fun trying to over dye existing colours. As for my hands, yes, I probably should have worn gloves, but luckily, although they were a little bit dry on the day that I'd had them in the dye bath, by the second day they were back to normal and they weren't red anymore. So overall, it's been a really fun project, and I will definitely be dyeing more cloth using natural plant dyes. And well, I hope that this video has explained to you how to do it and possibly inspired you to have a go at dyeing your own cloth using natural plant dyes. Okay, well, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again. Ayla.